Johanna, or should I do it? Okay, hi everybody. This is the second session in this series on the Social Psychology Network visual series on resistance in repressive and violent context. And today we have an amazing presenter, Mete, and two amazing commentators, Yasemin and Carmen. And I'll give a brief presentation of the presenter and the commentators, and then we can get it started. Mete is a social and political psychologist specialized in collective action, social movements, and group processes. He held positions across different universities in Turkey, Germany, and the UK. And currently, he's a lecturer at the University of Exeter. And he co-edited many books, including Social Psychology of Leadership and Crowds and the Political Psychology of Kurds in Turkey. And I think I'm going to give also a brief introduction of the commentators now. So the Yasemin is also a lecturer in social psychology with a focus on political protest and its consequences, and intergroup relations, conflict, and reconciliation. I lost count of how many books you have co-edited, Yasemin, but many, including also the recent book, which is about power of collective resilience against political violence and repression. And you have Carmen is a PhD candidate at Clark University in Massachusetts. Her research interests include resistance strategies, particularly anti-colonial resistance, and also resilience. She has co-authored a recent paper, which is about clarifying the conceptual ambiguities around resistance and resilience, and I highly recommend everyone. It's a very nice read. So with that, we have the format of this session is peer review as conversation. And the way it works is that Mete would provide a short presentation of his talk, which is entitled Beyond Dichotomies, Rethinking Protest Tactics in Context of Repression and How They Shape Allyship. After that, Carmen and Yasemin will provide a short commentary on the topic, each with 5 or 10 minutes, and then Mete would have some time to respond to those commentaries, and we will open it up to the discussion in the room. So the whole session would be around 90 minutes, and during the presentation and the discussion, if you have any ideas, thoughts, questions, we will share a Google Doc, so you can write it down in the Google Doc, and also after the discussion between the commentators and the presenter, there will be a chance for you to ask the question in person, or we will read it out from the questions you wrote in the Google Doc. So with that introduction, I will pass the screen and mic to you, Mete, so you can. So the title of the talk is Beyond Dichotomies: Rethinking Protest Tactics in Context of Repression and How They Shape Allyship.
Thank you, Ali. Hello, everyone. First, I have to deal with this technological stuff to be sure I'm able to share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I move this here, move this here. Nope. I don't know what's going on, but it's all right. I can't see you anymore, so please stop me if there was any issue, any question. I was quite nervous at the beginning, but I see a lot of familiar faces, so I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Carmen and Yasemin, for being here. I'm a big fan of them, not as just researcher, but as a human being, so I feel super lucky. And yeah, I see a lot of familiar faces, and I know that this is already a very critical group of people, so you are probably more equipped and aware than me of the fact that activist, organizer, or other discipline, the critical disciplines who theorize on resistance, collective struggles, and collective liberation has already deconstructed and set some new norms about this uninterrogated dominant use of the terms like violence and radical in these contexts. And most of them already abandon these efforts and rhetoric of categorization of different tactics and strategies. But at the same time, we are living in an almost like a dual reality where social and political psychology reproduce the epistemically and practically oppressive state-informed language on resistance tactics. But I don't want to paint like a hopeless and depressive picture. I normally do, but I'm trying to be more positive today, at least to the certain point, because psychological research on collective action and resistance has recognized at least some diverse forms of actions, but we have often classified them into two broad categories, normative and non-normative, or conventional versus radical, because we love the measurable stuff. We love this kind of positivist comparable models and so on. I think it's easier. And I understand that kind of broad categorization because it provides practicality, simplicity, and it make it possible to work with comparative models and processes. But there are a couple of issues that complicate the general line of argument. So I first present these general issues and critics and what I offer as a new topology. And then I end up with a new research line on allyship, which I hope to get a lot of feedbacks, because yesterday I got an invitation for a special issue. So the proposal I sent to Yasemin and Carmen was a proposal for that special issue. So I got an invitation. It's a good news, but I mean, now I have to write that paper, so it's not good that much. So I really hope to hear a lot of feedbacks. Okay. Why is the current understanding of protest tactics is limited? Why I criticize this stuff in every instance? There are a couple of things. I mean, you can increase the number of the critics, but I categorize into 5. First of all, we use an abundance of terms to refer the same or similar actions, or similar or like a very similar mentality of dichotomies, mostly interchangeably without even conceptualizing or defining these actions or differences. And it creates a lot of problem, because if an action is non-normative, we mostly assume it is also be radical. If it is radical, it must be violent. If it is violent, it has to be non-normative. So these uninterrogated transition creates a lot of problems, because their conceptual boundaries and robustness are diminished. And also there are like political problems related to this, because most studies associated non-normative action with extremism due to their maybe political biases or unclear boundaries in the current topologies. Second, and one of my core critiques, let's say, is that the normative and non-normative distinction inherently describe collective action through social approval. This itself creates a lot of problems, but there are a couple of questions alongside with this issue. So first, due to lack of definition and conceptualization in these categorizations, it is not clear in our research whose norms we are referring to with this distinction. When researchers speak of action that breach social standards, do we really ask question of whose standards or whose versions of normativity are being transgressed, right? This is normativity of activists, is this normativity of majority of society, normativity of dominant groups, or normativity of ourselves as researchers, right? We don't know. The second problem regarding this, since many researchers probably claim that this distinction refers to broader social norms rather than norms of specific groups, this understanding presumes that society always favor for non-violence, non-radical pacifist actions or protests. But this is again is an assumption, and my research and a lot of colleagues' research who are already here say the opposite. Sometimes society or big chunks of population favor for radical actions, what they call radical actions. And also the last point is we assume, or we approach the violence in general, but also the radical and disruptive tactics specifically, as something consensual in the eyes of society and also in the eyes of academics. But this is also not true. So I don't want to give too much space to here, but I have a little break for the critique of violence. So I don't explain all the history of critique of violence, but why this critique is relevant with us, which question is relevant with us, or why the violence is not consensual. So violence is first not limited with the direct physical violence. I think most of the researchers agree with that. So there are many more forms, and there is no hierarchy between these forms. I think the problems start here. So no one agree on this hierarchy. Sometimes we put moral hierarchies between violence, different violence. So physical direct violence sometimes worse or less ethical than cultural and epistemological violence in the eyes of scholars, and that's why they criticize a lot, or they never see some type of physical violence as a self-defense against a cultural and epistemological violence. It's a bit broad issue. And also violence is constantly reproduce itself, does not happen in a single time. There are a lot of complexities around the violence because it happens in between unequal powers like activists and police, and we mostly forgot these issues. And the other issue is, I think it's very obvious, what is seen as violence and normative differ across different individual groups and cultures, but also contemporary crowd psychology research and some critical collective action research already demonstrated that what is seen as violence and normative can also change through intragroup and intergroup interactions or power transitions or evolving nature of political conflicts, right? And it's not just for activists, but for the broader populations, like even onlookers and the third parties. Personally, I think this is the most crucial limitation in the current typologies. Activists, or in general, the agents of collective action, not necessarily activists, rarely see these actions, like a normative versus non-normative actions, as opposite or mutually exclusive strategies. As most collective action is not one-off, but rather sustained, iterative process. People employ different strategies throughout the social movements, and I'm not talking about just one specific individual or group change their tactics throughout the time, but also different subgroups, different individuals within the same group can adopt different tactics depending on many other conditions. And finally, the reason why I work on this issue is, although we acknowledge these dichotomies, we use these dichotomies, they are rarely examined properly. And we can count a lot of reasons why we don't think about these dichotomies, the nature of these dichotomies, or why we don't deconstruct that. I personally believe because of the lack of academic humility. It's also an epistemological issue. It's interlinked, but at the end, we don't ask activists how they define violence, radicalism, or normativity, and not just activists. To other colleagues, to other disciplines, we rarely ask them, and we define them on their behalf. And it's a big problem, not just because of ecological validity problem, but also this is kind of oppression, because we neglect the agency of activists to define their normativity, and by doing so we reproduce the marginalization and the repression of these activists. So what I offer a new typology. We offer a new typology on confrontational collective action. It does not solve all this problem. It's not clear. It's still in progress typology, but it can open a new avenues, because it's more like a call for debate for me. And how I end up with this typology, because we conduct a systematic review you see at the top. And this systematic review concludes that normative and non-normative collective action share the same predictors like identity, efficacy, and emotions, and many other moral issues. And we challenge the idea that they involve different motivational pathways. And following this, we recommend the we recommend that binary terminology of normative versus non-normative collective action or similar ones should be abandoned in favor of recognizing a continuum of protest action that vary in the degree to which they confront existing relations of power, inequality, and more practically police and outgrowths. And we propose this new typology for referring to different overlapping concepts, aiming to avoid conceptual ambiguity, challenge the dominant perspective that associating particular action strategies with unwarranted, unnecessary violence using social approval of a majority or dominant groups. And like I said, it's a in progress definition. I still have a problem what counts as confrontational, and I don't like I don't want to have a very clear definition, to be honest. I'm okay with being vague, but the reviewers are not. So I try to come up with some list of actions that that can be concluded as confrontational collective action. So for instance, the physical conflict with law enforcement and outgroups. So this is obviously like a high confrontational action, but it doesn't have to be physical. So sometimes perceived threat or shared expectation of police intervention in less repressive condition can be counted as confrontational collective action, or at least like a legal and political sanction and expectation of this legal and political sanction can characterize the confrontational collective action. But at the end, this aims to go beyond static binary categorization. So my aim is not creating a new topology like confrontational versus non-confrontational actions, but try to define different action in a spectrum from low or less confrontational to more confrontational action. And I argue that this is an action repertoire that does not exclude each other, but rather form a continuum of participation, and activists make a transition between these action strategies. Okay, how much time I have left? I can see you. That's why I need a...
You have around 5 minutes.
Going
5 minutes.
5 minutes, yeah.
Okay, then gone. So I'm here. Well, what's next after this new typology? And I conduct a couple of studies about these typologies, whether this is really reflect the activist experience in different contexts. My new aim is incorporate this new typology and some of the other frameworks I use to the allyship research. Because while much of psychological literature has focused on individuals become allies, how individuals become allies, there is a less attention on how this is shaped by the method of protest and so on. And there is a common assumption, again, the peaceful, conventional, and normative protests generate sympathy and third-party support, and hence allyship. I'm not sure about that. We know a lot of like contemporary movements employ confrontation and disruptive protest and get a lot of attention, get a lot of support. Yes, we know these tactics can polarize observers, but I try to understand under which condition this can strengthen solidarity and allyship, in what condition this can inhibit solidarity and so on. So what can this new topology offer for allyship research? First, it can shift the analytic focus from moralistic labeling to the functional understanding of action as situated within intergroup relations and structural constraints. And it can foreground the role of context in a way that the social representation of polycrisis, media framing, collective memory, and group norms in determining how these actions are interpreted by both insiders and outsiders. And rather than treating confrontational and disruptive protest as inherently alienating, I aim to show when and how they can instead serve as a catalyst of solidarity. And I argue that there are three main issues that basically determine whether the disruptive and confrontational collective action become alienating or strengthening the solidarity, which are perception of tactic legitimacy and efficacy, perceived state repression and political risk, and alignment of these tactics with the group norms of the potential allies. I will skip this and come to this, the final point in general. So my final aim, combining this new topology with the collective liberation framework in which we work with Julia and Yara, I don't know if they are here. By combining these two frameworks, we want to raise some issues on the conceptualization of allyship itself too. So not just allyship in the context of disruptive protest, but how we frame allyship as a social psychologist. I think activists from different groups often see their oppressions to be interlocked, and therefore they see their liberation as highly interconnected. And as researchers, we should consider moving away from seeing inter-minority solidarity and allyship as just helping behaviors to helping to outgroups to improve their conditions. While previous work has emphasized that these actions can be based on different motivations, they currently do not account for members of these groups who might perceive allyship as co-resisting, the collective resisting against the same oppressive system to reach shared liberation. I think this is the biggest missing point in the allyship literature and my aim. So I try to promise my word, 19 minutes. I know I already broke it, but thank you, and thank you all my collaboration. And I'm looking forward Yasemin's and Carmen recommendations, critics and thoughts, and you. Thank you very much. Where are you? Okay, here.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mete, for the thoughtful and really detailed presentation. Really enjoyed it. Okay, I'll pass the screen and mic to the commentators. Carmen, do you want to start?
Sure. Mete, I've said this to you a couple times already. I really appreciate all the great work that you've been doing over the last couple years. Also, Yasemin, I see your cat and I'm like obsessed. And thank you for this. And I know you like slid through the slides really quickly. So I'm also open to like you showing some of the slides back, because they might probably answer some of the questions I do have. I think also like one of the first point of like, it's interesting how, your proposal of confrontational tactics, of like confrontational action, is inherently trying to break apart this dichotomy that's like kind of that I see is misused oftentimes in the literature, but then again, a reviewer asks you, make it a dichotomy. So then how would you go about, I guess like one question I have, and I think like, how would you go about like showcasing going beyond that dichotomy? Like, how do we showcase that, like either maybe like realistically in a measure, or like how would you like conceptualize it in a way that goes beyond that like dichotomization? Does that make sense in some way? I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah.
Should I answer now or wait to the end?
You can answer now if you want, because I think that'll lead to my next question. So
okay, so what I do with one of my paper is not a great example, because then it's again dichotomy. It's just like at least in terms of measurement itself, it's dichotomic, because I use high versus low confrontation collective action in one of that papers because I had to. And but I try to focus on it's basically the transition and show the high correlation between these actions, and not just high correlation between these actions, but the similar predictors. So it's not the psychological pathway, psychological issues that leads to different actions, but different contextual factors in that certain time can lead to the use of that particular tactics. Of course, there are lots of methodological issues to show that, because I use in that particular example, I use quantitative study, and it wasn't easy because it's like a cross-sectional study and so on. But also I often remind reviewers that these are variable-centered analysis. So we are not grouping people. We are just, grouping variables based on our expectation, assumption, and so on in many times. So I think that's important. These are not different groups of people who engage in different groups of behaviors. The same person can, have a high rank in confrontation, high confrontation and low confrontation, collective action. And I try to show that as well. And I think one thing that we need to go beyond, and I think there's a great group of people to do that, is reminder of these are all organized action. And all of my discussion based on the putting the organized action into the spectrum, but there are unorganized ways of being confrontational, being disruptive, being resistant, and so on. I try to remind that. Yeah, I don't know if this was a answer of your question.
Yeah, no, I think it does because it's like the question is like, yeah, obviously like you need to, for the sake of like putting papers out there, like need to show like some level of difference, probably like lower and then higher. Then obviously it's the same group of people doing both, right? And so like, um, and it makes sense totally for that purpose. I think it's just like my frustration is like, okay, like we do see that like people are engaging in both, or like as like a matter of like for one, like it's organized action. And again, we're seeing that like, okay, like we're all like even like group members of that group, they're participating in both all different kinds of actions for different purposes, right? For that, okay, like we're gonna cause something disruptive here to actually stop something from happening, or they might cause disruption to get media there. Like that, those are very different end goals, right? And so if we think about it like, okay, is the point to attract media, and then how is that perceived if the goal is that, versus like we're disrupting like oil from being delivered, or like weapons from being, sent off for war or whatnot. So like different tactics have different purposes. And so with this and we know that it's usually the same groups of people who are engaging in it. So like what I'm like, I think like the review and everything that you've done thus far is great. And I think also like a lot of like predicting and showing that like, it might take different, like the risk of inaction, for example, might lead to more engagement and higher, more confrontational actions. I think what I'm just curious about is that, and like obviously it's like probably a future direction thing. And then also thinking about allyship is, would there be potentially like what's the, you know, how can we get to the point of like how can we measure, how can we like understand like the complexity of like the reasons why behind people's goals, and like, or like different tactics, and if it's like a goal related thing. Um if that makes any sense. But, like it's more of like how do we capture the complexity overall?
Yeah.
Right, of all of these actions together. And I think like you're making a good start way for that. My second question, which I think hopefully it'll also lead into some of Yasemin's points that we discussed earlier, was since we do know that oftentimes confrontational actions are often engaged by similar people within the group, what's the point of including allies into this? Like people, like I imagine a lot of the work that you've done is around climate, right? And so, and climate is often what we can treat it as everyone's affected. We're all here affected by climate, right? And so it's an all of us issue, which is different from other issues like Black Lives Matter, where often it's like minoritized groups and all that. So I'm curious as to how would we first treat that with efforts like climate, but then also how like how could we get allies to like, what's the point of trying to involve allies into things that are more confrontational for other movements, for example?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's the hard one.
I know, sorry.
No. It's a good question. First of all, I don't I mostly disagree with this numerical approach on the effectiveness. So I don't believe that the more allies means the more successful, more effective, and social change or resistance. I don't believe that. But why I go that direction is at least to realize that the allyship, especially in the context of climate movement, does not require every agreement on protest tactics most of the times. We don't need to be agree on that. We don't need to be agree on even effectiveness of these tactics. So I think these open a line that, okay, this is a great area that we can do different stuff while supporting each other. We don't need to engage those actions, but we still, at least we cannot, we don't have to contribute to counter protest. That's a one thing. That's a good starting point for the allyship and more sustainable movements and so on. And I think that there are lots of issues in the allyship research. I feel that they can benefit from this kind of typology, not just confrontational action, but try to understand that the allyship is not about the helping behavior, like I said. And again, I believe that the systemic thinking is an important part of that. The try to being able to understand that people use certain tactics for certain goals. And for certain histories, they sometimes need to use that tactics against some structural constraints and repression also. But sometimes it's just makes sense. That's why I try to. That's also interlinked with your first question. How to show that complexities. I think the one particular aspect to show that is to show that people use these tactics, whatever tactic, it doesn't matter, because it makes sense to them. Because they have one goal, they try to they try to achieve that goal, and these tactics make sense at that certain point. What was the exact question about the allyship again? Sorry, I distracted myself.
I think also the point of engaging allies, if anything,
Mhm.
in the first place, because like
Mhm.
I also see it like I get your point too. It's also like there's like you don't need allies, and I think also Yasemin and I talked about this before, and many people also in the room probably agree with this. I don't feel like you necessarily need allies or like people in the dominant group in order for movements
Oh
to
no,
like what like
no,
we don't
no.
need that, right?
Yeah, that's the co-resisting part. I don't need necessarily people from the dominant groups, let's say, to help me to achieve
Right.
some goals, but I need a different disadvantaged group.
Right.
Because at the end we are working against or fighting against an interlocked system of oppression, and
Right.
at the end having an allies, having a inter-minority solidarity is a very practical thing. It's not like an emotional or affective like a things. No, sometimes we burn out, sometimes we need support from there, and I don't need they come to my protest per se, but they are resisting against that local area.
Yeah.
It's also contributing my aim at the end, because it's somehow dismantle the system there, because they
Right.
are related. They're the same oppressor. It doesn't matter. So
Yeah.
what I think through the allyship is not like, oh, they are coming from there to my protest and helping me. No,
Right.
not like that. Not a more systemic, holistic, whatever this is.
Yeah. Which also reminds me even of like when we talk about like how movements are like longer term or like maybe like even more like maybe like more sustained, more active, like I'm thinking like encampments or strikes or things that like, you need to like hold something down for like a long period of time because that's the nature of the tactic. Like I'm also thinking like the solidarity and also like even like the actions of other people to support that, like where would that's also engaging in the action itself. So it's like how would we like it's hard to categorize that even as like also like, oh, you're engaging in action. And I don't even consider that like not just non-confrontational, it's supporting the confrontational action. So I'm like, how would we again, it's like feels like placing things in a box when we don't need to be placing things in a box. So I'm like, how do we consider that also? Because that's also part of maintaining the action too. So
Yeah, I think, we were talking with Yara and Julia about this. By doing this work, we are basically blurring the lines between solidarity, allyship, collective action, and resistance, which is a great thing. We don't need to, perfect lines, perfect boundaries between what is collective action, where allyship and where actual resistance start. We don't need this. We don't really need this. I don't understand this obsession to, sometimes I understand the practical reasons, but I think more blurring the lines is better to understand the complexity of this. We don't need to know where the in-group ends and where the out-group starts, or other way around.
right.
I think you're gonna make a lot of social identity theorists angry about this, but
Yes,
okay,
I
that's
know.
okay.
I know.
So let's move to Yasemin. Yasemin, would you like to? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, you already started on so many things that I want to talk about, but I'll start with a couple of other things and then come to that, because I think that blurring of the lines is a really interesting way to approach this. I just first want to say thanks for thinking of me for this, and thanks for having me, because it's always a pleasure to be engaged in these types of conversations. I want to be in a space where we can talk about ideas, and I want to feel like I'm uncomfortable, and maybe I think that someone is wrong, and maybe they think that I'm wrong, and I want to face that a little bit. So I really appreciate that, because even as you were just talking, I went, no, I have thoughts. So it was great. It's great. I also really love, obviously I'm a co-author on one of these papers, so of course I really love that you're trying to sort of address this this work on normative and non-normative, or sort of how we sort of create these binaries, these categories. And I like the idea of a spectrum of actions. I also, maybe because I've been preparing a lecture on discursive analysis for Friday, so I've been reading some of the old the 80s stuff that's sort of pushing back against a very cognitive social psychology that was really sort of saying, we have to stop thinking about our behavior in terms of up here and more in terms of out there, especially as it comes to being strategic. They talk a lot about function and impact. They are looking at the reasons why we are doing things, the function of me having a narrative, right? The function of me speaking about a topic in a certain way, as opposed to what's my attitude towards a certain group on 1 to 7, and is that what's causing my behavior? So what I, maybe again because it's salient, but as I'm hearing you sort of talk about confrontational work and thinking about things on a spectrum and looking at tactics, I went, well, yeah, of course, because people are making decisions with meta perceptions in mind, with the way other people are looking at the actions in mind. Things are not always about attitudes towards violence, attitudes towards whatever. It's about so many other things at once. So I really appreciated hearing about all of that. The thing for me always, because again, like my sort of thing is, I love talking about the ideas and the concepts and the theories, and I'm not as good at talking about sort of measures and relationships and things like that. So I got really stuck on concepts here and conceptualization of allyship, because I had a really strong knee-jerk reaction, right? So I saw the paper and I read the paper, and my knee-jerk reaction to allies is, we don't need them. Why are they here, right? And it's again because we have this conceptualization of allyship as a majority member or an advantaged group member, right? Engaging with or on behalf of a disadvantaged person, right? And so because we have this conceptualization in the literature, the sort of response as someone who has been really sort of shaped a lot by Dixon and Durkheim and Levine's stuff on inter minority solidarity, and how the powers that be will never let you wrest power from them. You have to take the power from them. And as such, my response has always been, well, I'd rather be in solidarity with people than be in allyship, right? That's what I want. So then, as I was thinking about this and my reaction to it, I kept thinking about allies in different contexts and what allyship means and these sort of blurred lines that you're talking about. Carmen already mentioned something quite important, which is when we're talking about these big ideas, the climate crisis, anti-fascism, you know, what exactly does allyship mean in those contexts? Do we then bring it to the local and talk about allyship in that sense? But when we're looking at those local scenarios, and what you've talked about as well, is it doesn't sound like the concept of allyship that comes to my mind. Now we're talking about those blurred lines. So then maybe we don't need to, maybe we can have a fluid conceptualization, right? Because as Ali rightly mentioned, we have this as social, and I'm also a social identity theorist, right? I consider myself a social identity theorist. Identity is important. How we see ourselves is important. How we interact with each other is important. So what happens in my mind if I consider myself an ally versus I consider myself in solidarity with somebody? What does it mean for me to say, I'm an ally, I'm an ally? What does that mean for me in terms of how it determines my behavior, how it determines my participation, how it determines my identity intersectionally? Because I think part of the reason we have blurred lines is it's not just that you're, you know, a member of an advantaged group. Many of us may be a member of an advantaged group on one level or another, right? What matters then is intersectionally, are there reasons that we're together? Are we here because we are hold the same sort of political views? Are we here because we share tactics? Are we here because, you know, workers of the world are uniting, right? What is it that we're sort of looking at in terms of our shared identity? Maybe that's essentially what we're talking about, right? That, oh, well, I might be an out-group on one dimension, but I'm an in-group on another dimension. Does it matter? I mean, I don't know. I think it only matters to the extent, of this question I've asked of, if I see myself as an ally, how does that stop me from behaving, right? How does that prevent me from engaging? Because my reaction to the word brings me a step away from the group. I feel like it takes you a step out. That might not be the case. It might be an empirical question, right? To measure and sort of ask people and find out how they think about these concepts. But if it is that when the second I see myself as an ally, I'm less engaged than if I see myself as, you know, in cooperation or in solidarity or what have you, then that might be something that we need to sort of look at. The other aspect of this that came to mind, and then I'm done, is I've seen a lot of papers in the past year or so about the general public's reaction to sort of, you know, non-normative actions, or, you know, how do they perceive these? And you get these sort of responses that are like, oh, well, you know, the general public thinks that you shouldn't do disruptive tactics, and you should, you know, focus your actions towards certain people in power and not the general public, and this and this. But again, when we have measures like this, we are bringing people hypotheticals, and they don't really have a sense of what the actions actually are. Because we can't always give them good examples. And especially when you talk about disruptive tactics, the thing that comes to people's mind is throwing, you know, cans of soup on paintings and then, you know, gluing yourself to the street. But that's, you know, there's so many other things. And then the reason people are asking that question, right? The reason people are doing that research is, well, are you more or less likely to support those activists? Are you more or less likely to support those actions? And that also brings to mind the question of allyship for me, right? So if you are talking about getting the general public support, is that leading on the road to allyship? So you can see for me, I love your work. You know that I love your work. I think you do fantastic work. I want us to blur these lines. I want us to ask these questions. So those sort of things about the concept of allyship, the meaning of allyship, are what come to my mind. Thank you so much, Mete.
No, thank you. It's fascinating to hear your. I always like, you know, having this conversation with you. So I have different answers. That's the problem right now, because there is one line of arguments in my mind about my genuine ideas about the allyship, like a more conceptual one, but also I'm thinking in terms of this proposal and what I'm trying to reach is a different direction. So I start with the conceptual part. I think there is again an instance that the discursive psychologists are right, because when I think allyships and solidarity, I never think these are different things, because I think Turkish. And in Turkish, these are almost same thing. I mean, they are not the exactly same thing, but in terms of the exact translation of the words, these are the same words. You know, they tap into the same words. And I think the question you raised already a great research question. First, we have to understand whether in different languages, in different contexts, these are tap into the different things or the same things in the eyes of people. I think that's important. So that's why I always think that when I think myself as an ally, and when I think myself as, you know, being showing solidarity with someone, these come and end up with the same thing for me. And I was thinking when you were talking again, I'm not also I am also social identity researcher, and I understand all this, you know, push towards that line. But I am not the first one who gonna say that. But we are not going to the streets based on one single identity, right? We are in the streets with a lot of identities, and we relate with that a lot of identities, and sometimes. You know, we always talk about with you this you know, sustaining action and participating action is completely different things. And you know, yes, going to the streets have a very identity informed, mostly very important identity informed motivation, but being in the streets is very relational things. You know, that's effervescence, that positive feelings that you experience, that matters. You know, because you feel that, oh, another world is possible and I can experience that. That's great. Yeah. So I can continue with this. Sometimes I completely forgot what in the first place I come to this place, right? I think that's something we should consider to maybe distinguish these motivations, right? But in terms of you know, again, related to Carmen's question, why we need the allies then in the context of this research proposal and in the context of climate actions in general. I think first of all, sympathy is not allyship. That's, I think we should start with this distinguish. You know? They mostly measure in that way. I'm not happy that way, but yeah, I think allyship requires an action, but allyship is also not like a singular thing. So there are lots of discussion about the performative allyship, authentic allyship, and how they look. And I'm not saying that we don't need performative allies. We need performative allies as well, because sometimes you know, we see in the recent days, we see how the media discourse is very important to feel empowered, to you know, to work against the burnout, to make that you know, movement sustainable. Sometimes the allies, even they are performative, they set the tone. At least they can challenge the tone, the rhetoric, in general rhetoric. And that's matter. I think that's important in general. And maybe it's not important how I be in the street, how I continue to work and so on. But it matters in terms of how mentally I feel, what kind of material and psychological sources beyond my inner circle I found it. So that's why I think it matters. It still matters. But I think that the question you raise itself is a great question. What it means to allyship and solidarity in terms of what kind of action I motivated to do. We should look at this in different contexts, and there is no single answer for that. I think there are lots of things going on in the chat, and I can't read it. I'm gonna read it during this time.
Yeah, great, Yasemin and Carmen. They were both great commentaries, and thank you, Mete, for closely and deeply engaging with them. So it was quite informative to listen to you guys. Okay, now the floor is open for others. I also see that a lot is going on in the Google Doc and the chat, but it's also possible just to unmute yourself and ask the question if you like. So now the floor is open.
Hi, I have
Hi.
to leave in a little bit, so I just wanted to say that this is very like a very interesting discussion, and thank you everyone for bringing these topics. And it's nice to have the moment to talk about these things. Like, I feel like a lot of times I'm just like thinking about this alone, like trying to I don't know, like get to some place, some decision on these issues, and indeed there's like a lot of complexity. So I left a couple of like comments on the note document, and one thing that I was thinking, like Mete, you talked about liberation psychology, and just to play kind of like the devil's advocate, like I Paulo Freire in his book of Pedagogy of the Oppressed, he talks about how liberation can only come from like real solidarity, and he puts up the case for like false generosity, right? So if we put that argument against the idea of blurring the lines, I feel like it would be interesting to think of like, okay, when does the blurring of the lines actually end up being more like system justifying or like status quo, like defending the status quo, than instead actually wanting to change, because it might end up being like supportive of that oppressive or dominant system. So more in the theoretical discussion of the part, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Mete.
I may miss some points of the question. Sorry, it's my mistake. I was really reading the discussion in the chat. Sorry about that. But I got the last point. You know, the system justification issues and blurring the lines. So is the question blurring the lines can end up this kind of system justifications issues? That was the question.
Yes, no, don't worry. So yeah, but I would say more of like false generosity that Paulo Freire has in his theory. So how like liberation cannot be actually attained with false generosity, and it has to be, one, by the oppressed, and two, through like real solidarity. So
Yeah.
if we blur the lines, maybe we can end up supporting the current system instead of thinking of an alternative. What comes to your mind about that?
I don't have that such concern, because it's same again. We discussed this issue a lot with the colleagues. You know, when we talk about the interlock system of oppression, everyone actually is oppressed. When you work towards your own case, actually you are working towards the collective liberation and so on. Are we saying that even the the racist white person can still be oppressed and work towards the collective liberation? I see the concern here, but also, I mean, again, we are not we are not just students, we are not just white, we are not just blacks, we have a lot of identities. That's the whole deal with the intersectionality, and of course these intersectional identities create different power dynamics and relations. But if you think about all these identities, there are very little group of people who are not actually oppressed by the system. So if you try to find, you can find a way that you are oppressed, and when you have an opportunity, when you have that kind of solidarity networks, that everyone works towards their own cause, then I don't see the danger here. I understand what you mean, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to add something, because I don't have a clear answer to that. But I'm not that worried about this issue. What I'm trying to say.
Yeah, sign it, Shine, if I say your name correctly. Yeah.
So yeah, I really enjoyed this presentation, and especially the style of presentation. So thanks to all the organizers for this. Yeah, so I think I'd like to try and pin you down a bit, Mete, on the confrontation versus non-confrontation. You knew somebody was going to bring it up, right? Because, as you kind of named yourself, that limitation of going back to a dichotomy when, this is the very thing that you can clearly see and provide evidence that this is not going to work, right? Really, if we really want to understand what's going on in the situation, violence versus there's so many problems that you rightly named. So to get back to the confrontation versus non-confrontation, my thoughts are around, why not just focus on the actual behavior? So like rather than like categorize or classify or dichotomize, why not just say this is the behavior? The activists stood up during a, talk on military or, something like that, or some funders or a bank, or they, that they stood outside a bank and, gave out flyers that were whatever, talking about the bank's investments. Like, is that confrontational, or are you not it's tricky to draw that line, when are you confronting, when you're not confronting? And I know what you're saying about the police, but again, in my experience, like, some people think they're going to be arrested, some people think they're not going to be arrested. Some people, even within the group, there's going to be an argument. This is typical in activism, as I'm sure you know, about whether it is confrontational or not. So, I mean, is it more useful to understand, and I know it's more painstaking, but to break down these activist behaviors, which I don't think they're done, it's done very well in the literature anyway, to break down rather than, collective behavior, radical collective behavior, it's all this one great thing, and we know it isn't. So would it be more useful to break it down into just specific behaviors and try to, disentangle or understand the context, the political context, all, whatever it is, identity, or all the different factors that do contribute to, whether a person actually, glues themselves to a whatever, do you know what I mean? Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, you're definitely right. I mean, at the first place, I never consider confrontational collective action as a method. It's not a method. It's for me, it's a shortcut, because people wants to hear something, and I want to include everything without excluding something, because in my understanding there is no confrontational collective action, non-confrontational collective action, because every action is about confronting something, some ideology, some leader, some repression, something. It doesn't matter the level of that. I mean, of course, for certain contexts, in terms of research question, it matters. But in terms of how I conceptualized it, I don't think it's as a method, the strategy. No, it's just I need to create a spectrum, and I have to name the spectrum with this name. Shouldn't be moralistic or status in the way that the many other, the namings do. So just I come up with this because, and I'm not the first one who used the confrontation and collective action. A lot of previous researchers use confrontation and collective action, but they mostly use in a context where there are actual confrontation, physical confrontation. But at the end, you're right. We don't need this. But if I need to dismantle this the dichotomies, I need to do something the more inclusive. That's why, because I agree, we don't need to.
Is Yasemin, do you have a follow-up, Yasemin? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to follow up to that. I think that's a really, I think that what I'm hearing is that we are sort of limited by our own by our own theories and methods a little bit here. Because in essence I agree that I think Sinead has hit something important, and then as soon as you said it I went, oh yeah, wait, we could probably just name things what they are. But Mete has sort of talked about the way that we tend to categorize things as a way to measure them is inherently dichotomous, right? It is inherently sort of creating the boxes that we need to sort of look at things. And we also need to sort of re-examine our own boxes and dismantle. I mean, part of the reason why this conversation works so well is we are already people who are trying to sort of pick apart other much more mainstream approaches to collective action and trying to sort of dismantle those, but in doing so we're still sometimes limited by our own approaches and the need to create new concepts and things that will sort of replace the old. But I also think Mete knows that we're part of that process, so we might create something new and then it's replaced by something better. So I found that really fascinating, and I appreciate both of you for bringing that together.
Yeah, I mean, before Joanna, I mean, I'm presenting here because I know this is not a complete picture. I try to hear the critics, and it's like the construction and reconstruction is like a collaborative, never-ending process. And yeah, it's like we all started somewhere, and yeah, collaboratively going somewhere, I hope. But I think the about the Yasemin point and Sinead point is there are lots of broader epistemological issues, and there are lots of incentive issues in the academia that really block our ways to do that in a more radical way or maybe quicker way. But it's a process. Sorry, Joanna.
My question is very simple, mundane. I'm just wondering, the term disruptive action wasn't mentioned in your typology, but we use that interchangeably as well. And Carmen is laughing because we're also researching that together. So where does is it for you the same, disruptive and confrontational action, or not? Are they orthogonal? Is it complete overlap? And where does civil disobedience? I see some of my scientist rebellion comrades here on the call. Where does civil disobedience fit into your typology?
Yeah, I at least initially when I come up with this confrontational things, I consider disruptive action as a part of high confrontational actions, but there are other confrontational actions who may or may not disruptive. Yeah, we know we mostly use interchangeably, but I mean that's a bit like a weird and counterintuitive sometimes, because when we try to use the confrontational collective action as a term, it's mostly about what we do. It's not mostly about what we do, what the other people do, right? Because that's to create the confrontation. What I expect from the outgroup, what I expect from the police, what I expect from the authority, or how I react to authority. In that sense, it's interesting, and all kind of, I think, disruptive action should consider as confrontational action, because how disruptive actions function in the society and how it is reacted by the police and authority is inherently confrontational, or at least inherently leads to confrontational or confrontation in general, and clashes. And that's the same for the civil disobedience, I guess.
So you're saying they're more or less interchangeable, yes? That's your answer.
Yes, but what I say is just I think there are the high confrontation actions that are not disruptive, that are not civil disobedience. They might be. I don't have a concrete answer, but I'm saying disruptive actions are confrontational, but not all confrontational actions are disruptive necessarily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm asking in part also because I think my impression is coming back to your earlier point about language that activists and organizers use. I think the term disruptive action is used more than confrontational, but
Oh yeah.
yeah. So it might be more useful to.
Yeah, definitely. We should maybe, yeah, I should reconsider that because it's more widespread in non-academic areas, hubs, and so on.
Mm-hmm. And then maybe just quickly, since my mic is still unmuted, sorry. The discussion earlier about allies versus other terms, and I think as Carmen and others were saying, especially when we're talking about climate activism and issues around wealth and things that concern all, I think I also agree. I think it's more helpful to think about it in terms of mobilization potential, right? Like these are all people, not allies, but just these are all potential. Oh, hi Frank. These are all potential activists or people who can be brought into the cause, not just to support it, but like be inherently part of it. So, but I do think it really depends on which cause we're talking about, and in some cases, of course, allyship makes more sense of a term. I also really like the book by, I don't know if all other people have read this one. What is her name again? I keep forgetting names. I'm really bad with names, but there's a book arguing against the term ally and for the term comrade simply, right? Which is kind of linked to for the same reasons, just that allyship and, like being comrades means struggling together as opposed to, anyway, just a few random thoughts.
Yeah, I agree to Fuat, by the way. Any tactic can be confrontational. That was I tried to say. But yeah, when you consider the disruptive actions, they are confrontational.
Okay, before going to Anna, just Mete, can you quickly respond to Shainat's point about whether the methodological focus of this confrontational action should be behavior rather than intention or mentality or something else?
I missed that question completely. Sorry,
All good.
sorry about that. No, that's the huge discussion that the Yasemin and Sarah and many other people already raised. Intention is not action, and yeah, intention is something that we consider to work on. There is no problem working on intention, but if our field built up like a 90% of intention measures, then there was a problem there. We should work on the actual action, not the intention anymore. I think, yeah, I shouldn't say that kind of radical things, but I should be stop working on intention, including myself, because I also do that because it's easier to collect data. Because in some contexts, it's impossible to observe the action. But yeah, that's our job. We need to do it better. we have to get that challenge and yeah, focus on the action itself, not the intention. Thank you, Ali, for reminding this.
No, all good. No, on that point, I also have some opinions that probably we also need to use different methods such as observations and others that are better able to capture actions and behaviors than just the surveys. Yeah. Okay, great. Anna?
Thank you so much for the presentation and for this very nice discussion. I think this is very much needed in this field. I don't want to add more complexity to what we are trying to do because it's already great. But I mean, I really value the role of culture in how we understand this phenomena. And a lot of times, even if we look at the definitions, they seem very westernized in a way. And so, for example, in some countries, I mean, an ally would be someone who would die for the cause. It would imply almost a very strong involvement in the movement. And I wonder whether I don't know, if by the way we define allyship in a way, does not capture all the dimensions on different types of allyship that represent collective action in the world. And also, for example, in some countries, protest is illegal. People cannot protest, but they still engage in collective action in different ways. So I wonder whether we are oversimplifying these concepts and by neglecting the role of culture. And because there are differences, for example, in Southeast Asia, right? People, allyship almost implies that you are loyal. It's very, I don't know, maybe other people could better talk about this. You are loyal to the cause no matter what. And to me, I think some people are talking about the difference between solidarity and being a sympathizer or an ally. These are very different things. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about it. I know in your presentation talked about, you are aware of the role of the culture, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on how you would like to integrate that in the phenomena that you are trying to capture.
Thank you for this question. It's great because I normally quite reluctant to use the term culture in my research. It's weird because I did my postdoc as a cross-cultural psychologist, but that's the exact reason, because I think there are lots of researchers arguing the cultural psychology and cross-cultural psychology is different. And what the cross-cultural psychology mostly do is taking one Western example and one non-Western example and compare and see it's different and quite inclusive research. But what you mean by the including culture, I think I become like repeating myself again and again. But if we ask to the activists or the people, the problem will be solved, because when you ask the activists, you are not asking the activists in the Western. If you look at that specific context, you're going to talk with that activist, you're going to talk with that whatever group you are working on. I think there are a lot of issue around the missing, I don't like the term lay, but lay theories of social change, lay theories of allyship, lay theories of solidarity. We don't have these theories, because we theorize ourselves. And I think if we have a more bottom-up research, coming from the ground, I know it's very boring. We already target and tell it in every paper we wrote. Participatory research, participatory critical research is very important. But it's not because it's selling, it's fancy, but it's because that built the knowledge. And when they build the knowledge, it's become automatically inclusive. It's become automatically culturally responsive. They do better than us. So that would be my weird answer. Sorry.
Okay, great. Is there any other questions? If not, I can ask a question myself. Yeah, and just one thing, Mete, you mentioned that the use of normative and non-normative actions have been basically associated what is accepted, what is in line with the sort of, So would you still be okay if we used, for instance, normative and non-normative without having that judgment, saying that the normative is what's in line with the current system and non-normative would be going beyond what the current system allows, regardless of the normative judgment, regardless of whether one thing is better than the other? Would you be okay with that type of definition? Or?
If it is not binary, and if it refers to the in-group normativity rather than the system-based normativity, I have no problem, because I think because I already said that my point is not about the verse. My point is more about the creating more like a spectrum, like an inclusive and rich tool of resistance, rather than focusing on confrontational, disruptive, or non-normative. We can use that. I don't care, but it's just, it has to be in-group normative. It's not like a normativity based on that group, or any group. If you look at the incels, we should define the normative actions through their normativity. If you look at the climate activists, we should define the normativity towards their in-group norms, history, and their negotiation process.
Yeah. So in a sense that the distinction between normative and non-normative have some sort of advantage in group perspective, or just try to prioritize some form of, let's say, values over and above other forms of values, right? And you mean that the confrontation is a little bit neutral, it doesn't prioritize.
Yeah, at least it doesn't conflate the social approval with the type of action. Second, when consider the social approval, at least it does not focus on the social approval of the dominant groups, oppressive groups, or oppressive groups. And I find it more neutral in that sense. But I got a lot of critics. It is not neutral. It is lefty socialist bullshit. I heard that.
Yeah. No, I mean that's a fair point, because a lot of the actions now called, like, I don't know, non-violent, sort of, there are a lot of examples of it that has been extremely subversive. And like, Gandhi is a good example that he didn't want the system by asking for the sort of, to stop consuming and things like that. So in a sense that looking at it traditionally, there hasn't been that much of a sort of values attached to those actions, but that's been co-opted a lot and then associated, okay, that the normative means democratic, legal, and things like that, and the non-normative, yeah.
That was my question in my mind, because I don't know if anyone has a thought about it. I always think that it's mind about the language barrier, but when I think about the confrontation, it's not really attached with the strong feeling in the media or in general, in the conceptual level. I feel like, the confrontational doesn't come along with a lot of emotions and meanings and more issues. Is that so to you as well, or it's just me here that way?
It's the same, yeah. I think that's. And you also mentioned that you're not comfortable giving a definition. You are completely okay with being a little bit vague in definition, but and just to push you on that a little bit, if you want to give like not a definition of confrontational action, what that would be.
So do you want the example or a definition?
Definition, that's something saying that, okay, these are the fundamental elements of a confrontational collective action.
I mean, at least the categories we use in the paper was the confrontational collective action involves at least one of the three, and then we make it four sometimes, but in general three type of issue. Like I said, first the physical conflict. If there's an actual physical conflict between law enforcement or outgroups, it is confrontational. Second, if it is if there is no physical conflict, but there is a perceived threat or shared expectation, and shared expectation doesn't mean consensus, by the way, but if there are like enough number of people who are worried about police intervention or expect police intervention to the action, that counts. Or if there are following legal and political sanctions due to the participation or shared concern, again, the shared, I use it not as a consensus, shared concern about these sanctions. So if I participate in collective action in this protest, that my career can go wrong, I can have a issue with the police, I can have an issue with the job interviews. If there are this kind of concern, then it is confrontational as well.
Okay.
Vague, I know, it's still vague, but that's less vague maybe.
Yeah. No, but I mean, so the way you go about it, saying that identifying the constitutive elements that would count as a confrontational action rather than providing a definition is that
Sorry, can you repeat it?
Do you mean that we need to identify like the elements that would basically can qualify a particular action as a confrontational action rather than giving a particular definition?
Yes, definitely. Because if you think about this possibility, because I give possibilities, so there are three chunk of possibilities. I mean, it's highly contextual, highly temporal, highly cultural. There are contexts that that certain action definitely bear legal consequences, whereas there are contexts there is no consequences, definitely, even the expected or subjective consequences.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks. Is there any other final burning question, comments, thoughts? We are almost closing to the end, and I see that a lot is going on in the chat and on the Google Doc.
Ali, can I get the question in the chat at the end? Is there anywhere that because I miss a lot of questions maybe or thoughts in the chats. I can copy and paste right now if there is.
No, we can send it to you. That's
Okay,
good.
perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay, great. If there's no other question or comments, then thank you for showing up, and it was a great discussion. Thank you. Special thanks to the commentators for having read the draft and the paper beforehand and then coming up with thought pools and constructive comments and feedbacks. So it was
Thanks
great.
for having us, and thanks for hosting. It
Yeah.
was a really, really nice chat. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yep. Well, great. Thanks. Thanks to you guys. So we have in this series, we have monthly meetings. You can see the schedule in this link. And we have also a lot of events that we have recorded and put up the sort of recording in our blog and also in the YouTube channel. So you can see the different tabs in the blog and have access to others as well. And if there is no other question or comments, it was great to have you all. Thanks a lot. And thanks, Mete, as well, for the presentation and the discussion.
Thanks everyone. Thanks Yasemin, Carmen, Ali, all the
Thank
organizers. Thank you very much. It was so fun.
Yeah. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.